I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
John and I are both clinical psychologists, and we began this show in the spring because we were so concerned about the signs of early signs of dementia that Donald Trump was exhibiting in his speech, in his gait, and also in the way in which his speech and language and ideas were becoming overly simple. That on top of a severe personality disorder called malignant narcissism that John has been talking about for many years and which we've been seeing on full display. But this week, a lot has happened, and we're going to review it with the eyes and ears of psychologists, but also with common sense. We're hoping to help the public, that's you, and politicians and the political elites and the media to think about Trump in a more clinically rigorous way. What do you think, John?
No, I think that's well put. And, we're seeing his malignant narcissism on display. And it is finally, I think, penetrating. It's being recognized for what it is. This incident at Arlington is not going away. We've become so inured, right, to his outrageous, boorish behavior that you sort of assume, well, this is just another one, we'll get over it. But this is really, he's desecrated the most hallowed ground that exists for the country, and for the military. Area 60 is literally the most hallowed of the hallowed. It's like the holiest of the holies. It's like he went into the temple and took the Torah and took a crap on it.
Well, okay, yes, I get the analogy, and there really is a federal law against using that area for political purposes. Of a law. But laws don't matter to Donald Trump.
Of course not. He's a one-man crime spree. But let's cover some of that. Let's look at how it's being covered. U.S. Army confirms Arlington cemetery worker pushed aside by Trump staff.
U.S. Army officials issued a strongly worded rebuke of Donald Trump's campaign on Thursday as they confirmed a worker at Arlington National Cemetery was, quote, abruptly pushed aside, unquote, during an altercation with members of the former president's staff. The statement was the strongest official criticism yet of Trump's controversial visit, in which he gave a thumbs up over graves as a photo opportunity, and there was an alleged physical assault by two of his staffers on the Army official. It came as outrage continued to mount from veterans and families of some of the service members buried there, adding to pressure on the election campaign of the Republican presidential nominee was the Army's revelation that the Trump team was explicitly told in advance by a Defense Department official that taking photographs and video footage at the cemetery breached federal law. This incident was unfortunate, and it is also unfortunate that the ANC employee and her professionalism has been unfairly attacked. ANC is a national shrine to the honored dead of the armed forces, and its dedicated staff will continue to ensure public ceremonies are conducted with the dignity and respect the nation's fallen deserve. That is a statement by the Army.
Yes, exactly.
Extraordinary, isn't it? Stephen Cheung, the former president's communication director, said the employee was experiencing something he termed Trump derangement syndrome. A day earlier, he claimed the person was mentally ill, while Chris LaCivita, Trump's senior advisor, called the employee despicable.
Okay. So Trump claims that this wasn't even for a commercial, that he was going there to honor the dead. But here's the proof. Here's the commercial.
We lost 13 great people. What a horrible day it was. one person in 18 months. And then they took over that disaster, the leaving of Afghanistan.
So that TikTok came from his official TikTok account. And so he got into so much trouble for this. Listen to how he answers questions about it and just count all the lies.
Count them.
Should your campaign have put out those videos and photos?
Well, we have a lot of people. You know, we have people, TikTok people. You know, we're leading the internet. That was the other thing. We're so far above her on the internet.
But on that hallowed ground, should they have put out
I don't
the
know what the
images of
rules and
those?
regulations are. I don't know who did it. And it could have been them. It could have been the parents. It could have been somebody.
It was your campaign's TikTok, though, that put out the video.
I really don't know anything about it. All I do is I stood there and I said, if you'd like to have a picture, we can have a picture. If somebody did it, this was a setup by the people in the administration that, oh, Trump is coming to Arlington. That looks so bad for us.
It's a setup, John.
Yeah, he was set up. He was set up. That's why he had the camera crew with him, following him, producing the commercial that he distributed.
You know, John, every week I spend so much time watching Trump rallies and press conferences. Well, there's hardly press conferences, but interviews. And I'm always so offended by the lying, but the lying has gotten worse. It's getting to the point now where he's lying so obviously that he can be caught within a day by a reporter just asking a few more questions, and then the lies continue. It's despicable. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, but to your point, the other thing about the lies is, you know, the famous story about the person who said, "Look, the neighbor says, look, I need you to return my bucket," and he says, "Look, I never borrowed your bucket, and besides, it was broken when you gave it to me." You know, he says, well, I didn't know anything about it. It was some TikTok people, you know, he said, we're winning the internet, by the way. We're winning the internet. And she said, yeah, but what about no, I don't know. We were set up. I didn't even know those people, you know, and even if we did, it was okay. So he just tells lies that are even internally contradictory with themselves.
Right. You're right.
And, you know, in J.D. Vance, he has found a kindred spirit. You know, I think J.D. Vance is someone who really has no empathy, who is really psychopathic, very capable of lying very, very smoothly. As we're going to talk about in this next section or two sections later, he has issues with women. But listen to how and this is one of the things that people of this personality do, is they attack the people who are attacking them. Right? Self-righteously, as if they're being mistreated, right? While lying through their teeth about what they're actually doing. So here, J.D. Vance's version of the dust-up about Arlington.
You guys in the media, you're acting like Donald Trump filmed a TV commercial at a gravesite. He was there providing emotional support to a lot of brave Americans who lost loved ones they never should have lost. And there happened to be a camera there, and somebody gave him permission to have that camera there.
You know, he's acting like he filmed a commercial at a gravesite, which he did because he released the commercial when all he was doing was offering comfort, just offering comfort to some poor grieving. Because, you know, Harry, that's the kind of guy he is.
Well, he's filled with empathy and compassion. I mean, that's just
always offering comfort. Just
always.
comfort. He sees people who need to be comforted. He's there.
And
if a camera happens to come along,
he'll toss them a roll of paper towels if they're really feeling badly.
Yeah. So, by the way, this is really hurting him with vets. So this is a group that's already anti-Trump, but look at what they're doing with their commercial, how they're using this Arlington incident in their commercial.
We've got Trump on the run, scared. His insults about service members catching up with him. He's panicked. Losers and suckers, he called us. Confirmed. Refusing to be seen with wounded warriors because it makes him queasy. Refusing to salute the fallen of World War I because he, quote, doesn't understand what was in it for them. Because he was afraid his dye job might run in the rain faster than he ran to a quack doctor when the draft board called his number. Comparing his sexploitations with the likes of Jeffrey Epstein to the sacrifice of those who went in his place to Vietnam. Now, maybe the greatest insult of all, turning a military cemetery visit into a political stunt with cameras in tow. In Section 60, one of the most hallowed acres of all, and when an Army civilian official told them they were breaking federal law that bans politics and campaign cameras, Trump thugs verbally and physically assaulted her. Disgusting. Donald Trump, the grave markers veterans and military families drop a knee to, are not your political props. They represent the heroes we served alongside, men and women you could never measure up to, friends who lived and died by the oath we all swore to uphold, something you will never understand, and why we're doing our damnedest to make sure no service member ever has to salute you as Commander-in-Chief ever again.
Wow. That's an incredible spot. I have to say, with all of my disgust at the ways in which his lying has gotten worse and worse, it's much more risky. He can be corrected within a minute. To have these guys come out within a few days that lays out the case so direct, it's irrefutable, isn't it?
Yeah. And John McCain's son, who is a veteran, combat veteran, recently came out making public statements on all the TV shows against him because of his dishonoring of the military. He never forgave him, he said, for dishonoring his father when he said he likes heroes who weren't captured. And of course, John McCain was a true hero, and he actually endured torture. But in other words, the other thing about John McCain's son, though, is he's a McCain in the swing state of Arizona. Okay. So when he comes out and says this guy's anti-vet, okay, in Arizona, that can really hurt him. That can make a difference. But, Harry, I think people are being a little unfair because, just like we said, he comforts people. He has, in his own way, been honoring the fallen vets. And here's an example. I'm sorry, to those of you who are listening on the podcast, this is a picture of Donald Trump bouncing a tennis ball against the Vietnam Memorial. Yes, this is a deep fake. He was not actually practicing in front of the Vietnam Memorial with a tennis ball. But I will say that, Harry, I will say, Harry, that when I first showed this to you, you started laughing. You said, and then you asked, is that true?
Well, I was just asking you if that was really his rear end, because that's the biggest thing I've ever seen.
No, but it's in character. You could be forgiven for asking if he would do that.
Well, I want to just take a moment on a serious note about this. My father fought in World War II, and he didn't see direct action on the beaches of Normandy, but he was in the South Pacific on a ship. And my father was a very reserved man. He didn't speak very much about himself or his feelings. And if I asked him about being on the ship, and he said it was boring at times. And although people were firing at him, there were kamikazes landing next to him. And after he died, I went through his dresser where he had his sort of personal papers, and I found his dog tags on a piece of string, and he had saved them. And I'll never forget discovering them. And, veterans have been used by politicians forever for political purposes. What Trump did in Arlington was horrible, but it's not the first time that veterans and wars have been used this way. And whether or not, however you feel about war and the army, it's a very powerful thing to have risked your life. It just is.
Yeah. And it marks you, and it's part of you. That's what you're saying, that he never let go of his connection to that, that part of his experience. And vets, I think, and I'm not a vet, so I'm only, imagining, I think they feel that deep inside themselves for their entire lifetime. It's just a cord. It's just a place. They don't talk about it, but the dog tags are in the back of the underwear drawer, always there, and I think, and I think he's offended that. Absolutely.
Deeply.
I believe believe that Donald Trump's base is cracking. And we're going to hear, by the way, we're going to have a great guest today. I should have announced at the top of the show, Dan Partland, who's the director of #Untruth. A lot of you saw #Unfit. That was released about a few years ago. And we'll talk more about the movies. But anyway, a lot of it is about the psychology of Trumpism. And that's what the movie's about, and how people get hypnotized and locked in a way where they can't be pried away. But I think there's some of them are starting to be pried away. And I think something like this is going to hit some working class, white people in the rural areas where it's just going to rub them the wrong way. And they're just going to say, no, I really do. I think I've been reading an article about evangelicals for Harris. That group, we're not most of them, but if we can have 10% of them, you know what I mean?
What I was going to add, John, what I was going to add to what you're saying is that, Harris has pulled ahead in most states, head to head, almost 5 points in one poll. And there hasn't been the convention bounce that often happens. And some pollsters have argued that she kind of got the bounce before the convention because there was so much of a groundswell. But I don't think it's going to stop here. Everyone's saying how it's going to be a narrow victory.
Nope.
If it is a victory, I think she's going to pull ahead.
She's
just
still going up, and he's still going down.
Exactly.
Okay. He's going down. He's going down. Okay. I pity the fool. No.
Me too.
His delusions of grandeur about his crowd size, or rather his crowd size, his crowd envy, his crowd size envy, his crowd size envy is continuing to create neurotic symptoms for him. Okay. So at a recent rally in Pottersville, Michigan, population 3,045. Okay. This is where Donald Trump gave a speech and talked about the thousands of people who wanted to get in but couldn't get into the event.
Outside, they won't ever report that. They never report it. Outside, you have thousands and thousands of people that couldn't get in. They don't get seats like you guys. They didn't get the seats that you got, believe me. But you have thousands and thousands of people outside, as far as the eye could see.
Boy, show me.
Well, as a matter of fact, Harry, we're going to do that right now because we happen to have cameras, or rather the local TV station had cameras outside the event. Now, he claimed that thousands of people were lined up as he was pulling up to the event, people who wanted to get in, because actually it was invitation only. Basically, one guy who owned a steel plant made his workers show up to be there with Donald Trump. So it's like an assembly. It's like an assembly for the steel workers. So they all had to be there and listen to Trump. Okay. But so, let's roll the videotape and see who was actually there. Actually, I'm sorry for those of you who are listening. I should have unmuted my mic so I could speak while you were listening to basically 3 minutes of silence. But what we were all watching, what we were all seeing was a crowd of about maybe 30 or 40 people in lawn chairs with Trump flags, picnicking, a lot of them, but sort of meandering around in a sort of desultory sort of way. It wasn't, and occasionally you might have heard one or two people. Maybe you thought your radio was dead, but you might have heard one people go, but it's like one person waving. What's the sound of one person
empty.
waving?
It was empty. It was empty. And by the way, I went to grad school in Michigan. That is so Michigan. If you guys don't know, it's just all of it. It's perfect. But you see, the lying is just, it's coming so fast and furious. I don't remember him lying like this in 2016. He did a lot of lying, of course. It got worse when he was president, but I've never seen anything like this one. I sound like Trump.
It's a really good point. We've become so inured to it, but to realize he is getting worse. That's the whole
Much
point.
worse.
He has a deteriorating illness, and so we're seeing all of the worst things about Trump are going to keep getting worse and worse, right? That's what we've been saying since the beginning of the program. I used to have this tagline at the beginning. I'd say, look at Donald Trump today, because that's the best Donald Trump you're ever going to see, because he's only getting worse and worse.
That's true.
And speaking of his only getting worse and worse, for those privileged few who were basically, kidnapped and forced to listen to him speak, this is what they heard.
She destroyed the city of San Francisco. And I own a big building there. I shouldn't talk about this, but that's okay. I don't give a damn, because this is what I'm doing. I should say it's the finest city in the world. Sell and get the hell out of there, right? But I can't do that. I don't care, I lost billions of dollars. Somebody said, what do you think he lost? I said, probably 2-3 billion. That's okay. I don't care. They said, do you think you'd do it again? And that's the least of it. Nobody. They always say that, I don't know if you know, Lincoln was horribly treated. Jefferson was pretty horribly. Andrew Jackson, they say, was the worst of all, that he was treated worse than any other president. And I said, do that study again, because I think there's nobody close to Trump. I even got shot. And who the hell knows where that came from, right?
God, can I just say, if it made no sense to all of you,
Right.
Trump switched topics 3 times and forgot where he was. So first he was talking about how Kamala Harris destroyed San Francisco. Then he said that he shouldn't say that, and that he had to sell a building that was worth a lot. Then he switched without even saying it. I lost 2 to 3 billion. What do you think he was talking about? Well, he has this thing where he says in other speeches and rallies, by choosing to run for president, I must have lost $2 or $3 billion over the past 8 years, because I could have been making money during that time instead of giving my life to my country, whatever the crap that he says. Here he doesn't even put it together. I had to fill it in.
Right.
I had to fill it in. That's
it is impossible. It is impossible to follow that train of thought. It is a physical and literal impossibility for any human being to follow that train of thought.
And listen, it's very important. And those of you who have relatives who are suffering from dementia, often they will say something that sort of makes sense. And then what we do when we love someone is we fill in what's missing. We kind of figure out what got dropped out of the statement. That's what's happening here. He's not even bothering to keep track of what he's talking about.
But Harry, he's aware of that, and he has an explanation. Remember how we say he always finds a way to do improv with himself. Okay. So whatever crazy thing comes out of his mouth, he goes, sure, and just goes with it. Okay. So now he's either read in the press or he's aware in his clearer moments that he is, as you say, gumming ideas together without transitions, what we call tangential speech, right? Which is a formal sign of dementia. Okay. Well, Harry, you may think that that's a sign of neurological decline, but now, and by the way, a lot of people may not know this, but Harry has a PhD in English from Yale. He got that before he got wise and became a psychologist. Just kidding. But it's very relevant here, Harry. It's very relevant because you'll see English professors have come from far and wide to hear how Donald Trump puts ideas together.
I do the weave. You know what the weave is? I'll talk about like 9 different things and they all come back brilliantly together. And it's like, and friends of mine that are like English professors, they say, it's the most brilliant thing I've ever seen. But the fake news, you know what they say? He rambled.
Professor Segal?
Well, like English professors that he has, I don't think anyone's ever said that to him at all. I agree that he has rhetorical power when he's at his best, but this disorganization, it's amazing how he can observe himself faltering and hear it and then rationalize it as genius. He's done this before, but this is
He rationalizes his
bad.
genius. Right. He's the only person who's narcissistic enough to think that dementia is genius. I mean, come on. That's chutzpah. That's chutzpah.
It's tremendous chutzpah. I agree with you. Unbelievable.
Because he's doing the weave. He's a master weaver. He's a master of it. Okay, and people can't believe it. They can't believe it. How he can have 9 disconnected, unfinished ideas, and then somehow weave them into it's like Picasso or something. He's taking all these fragmented pieces and he's putting together a new art form.
Yeah,
the weave.
Trump is an abstract expressionist politician, clearly.
And this is why the English professors are studying him.
From all over the place. They come from all around.
They come from far and wide. Okay.
Well, it's so exhausting.
Enough fun with that. Okay. This is actually so good. I'm glad we got a laugh out of that, because this is actually very serious, this next section. We're talking about his encouraging violence, political violence, in this case, specifically against journalists. This is not new, but I want you to see how horrifyingly direct the connection is between Donald Trump's rhetoric and actual physical violence. So can we see the photo of that headline? Trump calls journalists enemy of the people during Pennsylvania rally minutes before man storms into media section. So I wanted you to see that headline only to establish that there is a sort of cause and effect connection here, or at least he made the statement action reaction, let's put it that way, stimulus response, okay, that there's a direct connection between those two things. And so Donald Trump is what we call a stochastic terrorist. He encourages other people to commit acts of violence. So let's see the attack on the CNN. He tries to get over the barricade to attack the CNN reporter.
By 2020, we did much better generally. Since Kamala and the media don't want to talk about her That's cute. That's okay. He's on our side. We get a little of that itchy that way, huh? No, he's on our side. You know what he's showing? At Doughnut, an amazing thing happened. You had 2 American flags, very far apart, held up, I think, by different cranes. They were very big flags, beautiful flags that they were waving. And as that horrible event was taking place, the wind blew the flags together and they formed a perfect angel. I don't know if we have it, but it was a perfect angel was formed. I'll tell you, a lot of things happened. If we haven't put it up, if we don't have it.
So the crowd is cheering him as he leaves. But let me show you that moment one more time. And for those of you who I know were listening, you didn't hear very much. It was just him trying to attack the reporter and being subdued by the law enforcement. But let's go over those seconds one more time, but this time with a camera trained on Trump, and you can hear what he's saying and how he's actually encouraging the attack.
With the whole election, actually, in 2016 we did great, but 2020 we did much better generally. Since Kamala and the media don't want to talk about her radical record, we will. Beautiful. That's beautiful. That's all right. That's okay. No, he's on our side. We get a little itchy, David, don't we? No, he's on our side.
Don't worry. He's one of us. He's okay.
Exactly. Right. He's one of us. And also, he starts by going, beautiful, Beautiful. So just how sick that is, right? There's an act of violence transpiring right in front of you, and he's going, beautiful. That's beautiful.
John,
He's one of us.
He spent nearly 3 hours watching the attack on the Capitol on his TV off his office, right, in that area.
That's correct. And not only that, but he put his favorite, most violent parts on rewind and watched them over and over again. Essentially, it's like sadistic masturbation. This is sexual pleasure for him. He really is a sadist, and people really need to understand that this is the real thing.
This is the real thing. I agree.
So he got a rise out of that experience, right? It was beautiful. It was beautiful. Right? It wasn't just that he's on our side. It was beautiful. And then at the end, by the way, you didn't hear this on the clip, but then at one point when they're dragging him off and the crowd is going crazy, he goes, "Oh, we have a lot of fun at these Trump rallies, don't we?" So,
yeah, he'll get to think about it later that night.
And here's the thing. This is what stochastic terrorism is. Stochastic terrorism is when a leader is putting out a message that encourages his followers to commit acts of violence. So I just like to show you this political cartoon, which I think really captures it. For those of you who are just listening, is a picture of Trump on TV going, "These are horrible people," and you see someone in the dark with an AR-15 and a MAGA hat, sitting in the dark, looking evil and angry, saying, "I'll handle them, Mr. President."
He was doing this in 2016 at his rallies too. Remember, encouraging, calling the press the enemy of the people, encouraging his rally goers to beat up protesters.
Yeah, talking about a Second Amendment solution.
Well, that was the word. Actually, that should have disqualified him from ever running again. But we had a very, very weak Republican Senate that refused to convict him, even after January 6th. So, should we go on to the next?
Yes, Harry, you had some clips from his Moms for Liberty meeting that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, as you all know, I try to spend time on a rally or an event and really go through it carefully, which is getting more and more difficult. But let's see if we can get through until Election Day. But this was a really interesting one because this week he has not been campaigning much. This is when, Labor Day is when things start, and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have been all over the Midwest and Georgia. They had that bus trip in Georgia. But Trump sat down on Monday to be interviewed by the Moms for Liberty. This is a Florida group of very conservative parents, mothers mostly, who are fighting the woke agenda in the public schools in Florida, including banning books and restricting curriculum and all that stuff.
First, they read the Diary of Anne Frank, and then all hell breaks loose.
You just gotta get that Jewish stuff out of the curriculum. But I think that what's interesting about this is, if those of you who follow this as closely as we do, you might remember his interview at the National Association of Black Journalists, where he's sitting in a chair, given a microphone, and several journalists, including the amazing Rachel Scott, asked him questions, and he got all angry, and he accused Kamala Harris of just becoming Black recently and all that stuff. This is kind of a mirror image of that. He's sitting on the left part of the stage on a comfortable chair with a microphone, and these two women are asking him these softball questions. Now, you guys might remember when he was on Fox and Friends Saturday edition, or with Dr. Phil. There are venues where everyone in the venue, where all the interviewers believe all of Trump's lies and his vision of himself. That vision of himself as this brilliant, graceful man who's been persecuted and harmed, who's only done this out of the love of his country, who's lost lots of money, but the persecution. And when he's talking to people like this, he gets so comfortable. And John and I have talked about the documents in Mar-a-Lago, and John is convinced Trump stole all those documents to sell them. I'm not quite convinced of that. But what I am convinced of is that he loves having people come into his office where he can talk like this, and everyone treats him as if everything he says is true, and he can pull out a document about the invasion of Iraq or Iran, right? And say, see, I had this started. I was in the Oval Office. He loves that adulation. And
but Harry, they're all doing improv. They're all doing improv. That's what you're saying. In other words, it doesn't matter. Someone should do a Saturday Night Live skit about this, right? So first he's just telling his usual lies, and then he just says, I was almost eaten by a lizard coming here. It was a gigantic lizard. It was 12 feet tall. I just at what point
John,
with the interviewer have to say, wait a minute, that's not true.
Okay, that's very funny. But my point is, I believe that Fox and Friends, those guys, Dr. Phil, and these women, they're not improvising an act. They really believe these lies. They believe this is the great man talking to them, that he's done so much for them. They believe it. And because they believe it, it puffs Trump up. So he feels great, and he's more charming. And guess what? He's better cognitively organized. He doesn't get lost in the way he did in the clip that we saw, because he's surrounded by people who idolize him, who love him and respect him for all the things that aren't true. Mm-hmm. And I want you guys to watch it, because his level of comfort is really amazing. I only have 3 clips for you. The first one is when he's talking about Kamala Harris, and he refers to her in coded language.
It's much easier to be a Democrat. Let me put it that way.
Apparently, you don't have to take any interviews.
That's right. You don't have to do anything. We saw that the other night, and you won't see too many more interviews. And I have a debate coming up with this one.
With this one. Do you remember when McCain made that mistake and referred to Obama as that one? Mm-hmm. There was tremendous backlash. And this is the way that African Americans are often spoken about. Mm-hmm. And this is Florida. This is all coded language. But notice how comfortable he was. We're going to go on to the next clip, Rex.
It felt like a multiple choice quiz. She would give her like several answers that she could have given.
Yeah, they were feeding it to. I was surprised, actually. I mean, I was surprised she didn't do a lot of interviews, but she's not good at it, I guess. And they knew that. They knew something that we didn't know. I think she would have been better off if she just did interviews, even if they weren't great. It would have been better than, because now everyone's watching, and now we see she's defective. She's a defective person. And we don't need another defective person as president of the United States. We just had that.
What do you think, John?
Well, I think it's interesting. He always projects who he is onto everyone else. And you made a very good point last week. You said, he used to have clever nicknames. Now everybody's just crazy, or crazy and stupid.
Deranged.
Deranged. Different synonyms for crazy, but also different synonyms for cognitively impaired.
Yes.
So of all the nasty lies he could tell about Kamala, to say she's defective, I don't think anybody, even people that don't like her, don't think that about her. Do you know what I mean? But even some people who like him think that about him, because he really is. He is defective. I mean, we're showing you the evidence, folks, that he is objectively defective.
But you're not seeing it here because he's so comfortable.
No, it's true. He's also being charming and witty at the same time, which is interesting.
It's not at night. It's not a rally. He's not being challenged. He's being adored. Yeah. And he can ramble, but he sounds so much better than he did in that clip that we saw when he was all over.
It's a really good point. And this next clip that you wanted to show, Harry, I know we sort of debated whether to show it because it's kind of long, but I feel as psychologists, we're actually obliged to show it, because he never talks about his childhood or his origins, because he, really has no relationships or internal sense of relationship. So here's a question where they ask him, something about his mother, right? Tell me about your mother.
Yeah, the woman, because these are mothers for liberty, they wanted to ask him about his mother. And notice how he avoids the question ultimately. Rex?
I've heard you talk about your mom in interviews before. She was obviously a very strong woman. Was she hard on you with school? Tell us about your mom a little bit.
No, she wasn't. She was great. I had a great mother, great father, very different people. My mother came from Scotland, and she came over to this country. Are there people from Scotland? You know, actually, that's hidden. Do you know that some of the biggest, smartest, most brilliant leaders in business come from Scotland, and nobody knows it? Or at least, you know, their parents came from Scotland. But Scotland did very well in this country. I'll tell you, it's very, we have people, and I know that one group, they're a very successful group. Now, she came from Scotland, great place, and she came over just for the summer, and she was 19, I guess, and she met my father, and they had a very long marriage. I said, I'll never top you on that, Pop. You know, you always want to be a little bit better than your father if you can, a little more. And my father loved that. You know, some fathers don't like it. When you have a father that doesn't want his son to be a success, well, you got a problem with a father. But there are plenty of them. I've seen plenty of them. They make it actually hard for the son. But no, I had the opposite. I had a father that loved what was happening. But they met, they fell in love, they got married, and they were married for 6.5 decades.
Wow.
A long
beautiful
time.
marriage.
I said, Pop, I'm not going to be able to beat you with that. But anyway, and they had just a great marriage. Very different people, but they had a great marriage, very, very strong marriage.
Okay, so let's just take note that he never talked about his relationship with his mother.
Right.
He just said she was terrific.
Right.
He kept saying that his parents were different people.
Right.
Never
I saw that.
explained how or why.
Code for they didn't get along.
Maybe so. Maybe so. And maybe his mother was really very tough on his father. I don't know. We don't know the story. But can you all sense that he's sitting on top of things he's not saying? There's something so easy about it. It's an American story. This immigrant marries this man. I know. And there's so much missing. You know, as therapists, John and I listen to people for many hours a day. And you don't just listen for what patients tell you. You listen for what's missing.
Yeah.
And in this case, what came to my mind, and this is just my association, obviously, but Trump had an older brother that he really loved, purportedly, who died of alcoholism and was pressured by his father to be the successor to him. But his father beat him down. And he died of alcohol, and Trump was a bit younger than his older brother. And that's why Trump says he's never taken a drop of alcohol. So there's a whole story about fathers being tough on sons that's being literally paved over with a defensive smile.
I think it's being reversed, actually. You know, some fathers don't want their sons to be successful, but he was the opposite, which means that he didn't want his sons to be successful. That he was very, because he's a malignant narcissist, so he needs to be above everyone else, right? So I'm sure he was aggressively dominant in the same way that Trump is. But
no, his
what you
father
were saying
sent him.
about-
His father sent him to military school because you couldn't control him. He was a completely oppositional, defiant, out of control kid. But I just want people to realize just the way in which Trump tells this lie about himself defensively. My guess is anyone with this much disturbance is sitting on a lot of trauma. They just are. That's how you form a malignant, a narcissistic, defensive personality.
And to your point about what people don't say, if you follow the process of what he said, she said, well, tell us about your mother. She was terrific. Okay. So one, honorific or one superlative. And he goes, she was from Scotland, and then someone cheers, hey, anyone from Scotland in the room? You mentioned about him doing stand-up, and then he says, Scotland, great country. The best entrepreneurs in the world come from Scotland or from the children of people from Scotland. So he just starts bragging about how great he is because he's got Scottish roots and those are the best businessmen. So in other words, the mother never enters the conversation. It just
Exactly.
circles directly back to how great he is as a descendant, as a
Yeah.
son of Scotland.
And that's why it's a defensive structure, and it's
Exactly.
it's impermeable. But it reminds me that Scotland, and then there's also the professor, his uncle from MIT. He got his intelligence there, and then there's all the English professors who are gathering around to hear how brilliantly he weaves his disorganized speech.
A master weaver, a master.
Yes.
They come from miles to hear to see him weave. So we're going to talk about Vance again. I believe that Vance really hates women. I've come to believe that he is a true misogynist, but also I think we should start talking more deeply. My departed mother, who was one of the founders of the National Organization of Women, she was really one of the leaders of feminism. Gloria Steineman and Betty Friedan used to come to our house when they were for planning meetings.
Wow.
And her greatest wish was to live to see a woman become president. So I know she's up there rooting for Kamala. But so much of this election is about men being able to control and subjugate women in so many ways, from devaluing her. Oh, President Xi would, think she was an easy mark because she's a woman, but also more fundamentally taking control of women's bodies, not only making abortion illegal, making it illegal to travel to another state. So now you can't travel freely without showing your papers. And Vance's whole vendetta against childless women, I'm thinking this is the weirdest vendetta I've ever heard. Okay, it's not so weird. It makes sense, okay, because childless women are dangerous. They're not under the control of a man. Okay, so they are like, it's like the horde of immigrants that are coming from the insane asylums pouring over the border. These childless women, okay, are free agents working against the patriarchy. So we need our women married. We need them pregnant. We need them to give birth to those babies. It really is a Handmaid's Tale understanding of femininity. It's real.
And we've seen Trump completely flip-flop on abortion this week. He is flailing, saying he'd vote to overturn the 6-week ban in Florida, but now he says that he won't. And then he says he's going to be the best president for women's reproductive rights.
Yeah. While also, he's totally floundering. He's totally floundering on this. We were going to have a whole sequence on it, but we didn't have enough time. But it is really worth noting that he's really not satisfying anybody now, because the evangelicals are aghast that he was saying that he was going to afford the 6 weeks and that the 6 weeks isn't enough and that he's the pro-choice president. So they're wondering what's happening. And then he's not winning any pro-choice, but he's not fooling any pro-choice people just by tweeting his pro-choice. It's just ridiculous. But getting back to Vance, but I think it's important that we put this in the context. Oh, and the other part of misogyny, I'm sorry, I don't want to leave this out, is the incredible record of sexual assault that so many of these men seem to have, right? The whole Jeffrey Epstein phenomenon, it seems like it's rife through the whole Republican Party, from Gates's, trafficking teenage, girls to, on and on, or to the multiple people that Trump has assaulted. So that's another way in which this Republican movement is an anti-woman movement. I'm not just saying that to get votes. I mean, they really hate women. I mean, they really see women as something to be controlled, exploited, dominated, violated, enjoyed, and made into an object, conquered and owned.
Well, certainly controlled.
Yeah. So the most egregious thing that happened this week, this is probably something that escaped your notice. It was such a small little incident, but I want to show you a tweet that J.D. Vance put out. So it says, this is the part that J.D. Vance has written, breaking, I've gotten a hold of a full Kamala Harris CNN interview. Okay. And the joke is it's actually an interview with a Miss Teen USA from about 20 years ago. Now, so first of all, it's kind of a sick joke like, oh, Kamala's so dumb, right? I'm going to show a tape of it of a dumb person giving a dumb answer, and that's going to be my way of making fun of Kamala. Let's watch the video, and then we'll talk about how this video has affected this woman's life and Vance's response.
Okay. Recent polls have shown a fifth of Americans can't locate the U.S. on a world map. Why do you think this is?
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S. or should help South Africa and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries, so we will be able to build up our future for our children.
Thank you very much, South Carolina.
Wow. She was so nervous.
Yeah. Okay. So she blew the question. But when this happened, it had a huge effect on her life. This video went viral. And she was so distressed, she needed therapy, but she was actually contemplating suicide because it was such a public humiliation. And so she's gotten over that, but J.D. Vance is now we have a candidate for vice president who has re-released that video to millions of people, okay, 10 years after it had all been sort of dead and buried, just to make a cheap anti-woman joke about Kamala. But, look, we know that J.D. Vance is not a monster. He's not a monster. He's not unfeeling. He's not an uncaring person. Okay. He's human like the rest of us. So when he realized that this was the case, when he learned how devastating this had been to this innocent young woman, of course, he responded appropriately.
After CNN released a small clip of the Harris interview, you on Twitter posted a clip from a Miss Teen USA beauty pageant from 2007, Caitlin Upton, and you wrote, "I have gotten a hold of the full Kamala Harris CNN interview." Now, this thing that surfaced around the internet for a few years, she struggled answering a question back in this beauty pageant. I'm not sure you're aware, in 2015, Caitlin Upton did an interview in New York Magazine about all the social media attention this clip got, and she said, "I definitely went through a period where I was very, very depressed, but I never let anybody see that stuff except for people I could trust. I had some very dark moments where I thought about committing suicide." So when you posted this last night, were you aware that the woman you were posting a picture of had contemplated committing suicide for the attention it had received?
No, certainly not, John, and my heart goes out to her, and I hope that she's doing well. Look, I've said a lot of things on camera. I've said a lot of stupid things on camera. Sometimes when you're in the public eye, you make mistakes, and again, I think the best way to deal with it is to laugh at ourselves, laugh at this stuff, and try to have some fun in politics. I posted a meme from 20 years ago, and I think the fact that we're talking about that instead of the fact that American families can't afford groceries or health care, young families can't afford to buy a home to raise their families in, those are the real crises that we should focus on. And there's nothing that says that we can't tell some jokes along the way while we deal with the very serious business of bringing back our public policy. Politics has gotten way too lame, John, way too boring. You can have some fun while making a good argument to the American people about how you're going to improve their lives.
Okay, I just want to be clear, though. You said you did know. Would you like to apologize to Caitlin Upton for posting that last night, given what you've now learned?
John, I'm not going to apologize for posting a joke, but I wish the best for Caitlin. I hope that she's doing well. And again, what I'd say is one bad moment shouldn't define anybody, and the best way to deal with this stuff is to laugh at ourselves.
Last night, Vice President Harris.
I just hope that Caitlin has had children by now, because that's really what women need to do, is just have some children.
Yeah,
God, what a jerk.
What a jerk. What a jerk, right? I mean, he never apologizes. But also, I think this is really interesting. This is how egocentric and empathyless they are. But also, look at the misogyny here, okay? 4 times he refers to this as a humorous event. 4 times. if you count them. He says, well, look, she says, well, now that you know that, it made her suicidal, now does that change your perspective? Maybe just, a wee bit, just a tad, and he says, look, I think the most important thing is that we can laugh at ourselves. That's his response. So, when I mortally wound another person, okay, and they're bleeding out on the street, the most important thing is that I can laugh at myself and go, Butterfingers, I stabbed them and they're bleeding out.
John, you're being so hard on him. I mean, he wished her well.
He did wish her well.
I mean,
but,
at least
he also.
Oh, it's just so repulsive. I'm sorry. I'm so mad.
It's so disingenuous wishing her well. But he says, look, I think politics has gotten too lame. We need to be able to tell jokes. We need to be able to, in other words, telling a joke that humiliates this young woman is something we need to be able to do. You see what I mean? He's saying we need to give ourselves permission, right? To be misogynists. To act like misogynists.
Right. Oh, it's horrible.
And the other thing is, look, Harry, as you've pointed out, he's a political novice, right? He's just getting started. He's just getting started. So look, last week we showed that really cringy moment that he had in the donut shop that went viral. And a lot of people were talking about it. But you know what? Give the guy credit, because he went back to the same donut shop and tried to do it again, tried to do it better.
Hey, I'm JD Vance, and I'm running for vice president. With whom? I'd rather not say. Well, I'll just get whatever a normal human person would get. You, and what do you do for work? Right, you work in a donut shop. What's that? It's a donut? Okay, and what about that? It's also a donut? Okay. How long you been here? How long have you been a black at a job? And how long have you been black? I'm sorry. Hey folks, she doesn't want to be on camera, so just blur her face out. And while you're at it, blur my face out too. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm so sad. I'm so tired. Hey, you don't have any like lean protein back there, right? Like some Soylent or tilapia or something? No, just donuts. Oh, donut. It's like a beignet or a croquembouche. I would love to eat those again. Have you ever been to Paris? What if we tried this over again and I went somewhere else? Oh my God, I just want to die. How long have you been here? How long have I been in here? It feels like 30 years. Hey, is there like a fridge back there you can put me in and lock it? I'm and I do not want to do this anymore.
How long have you been black?
No, I love first. But by the way, just so people know, this is not JD Vance. This was a JD Vance imitator. If you haven't figured that out already, I love the scene where he goes, "Well, so how long have you been working a black job?" I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, how long have you been black?
I'm so glad you found that, John. It really made my week.
Me too. All right, so we're up to the miscellaneous part of our show. We just kind of go over things that are important that don't really fit a category. So one of them actually fits what you were saying, Harry, when you said that one. And you said that's kind of a code, right, for Black people. But, maybe, look, you have to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he just used that phrase because, he couldn't think of the right word, or, that, like when Clinton said, I didn't have sex with that woman, because he actually froze in the moment he couldn't remember her name. But another racist trope that I think, we'll recognize from our childhood, we heard this, around, he's one of the good ones, right? Is what they would say about a Black person who was doing good, doing well. But that was how you would categorize that person. So let's listen to Donald Trump talk about a Black politician.
I'd say, Mr. Congress, look who we have. Byron, stand up, please. Superstar of the future. He's already a superstar, but he's a superstar of the future. Byron Donalds, Florida. Wow, that's nice to have you here. That's good. He's great. He's great. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. That one is smart. You have smart ones and you have some that aren't quite so good. But we have a group of people that are really great. But
see that one.
He said that one again.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And just to, not to correct you, John, but just to emphasize that when we were growing up, there was so much racism that if there was a Black person who worked for you or someone you knew personally, you could kind of vouch for them and they'd be one of the good ones. It was just a kind of racism with exception.
Right. A racism with an asterisk, with an exception, right?
Like
and that made you feel that made you feel liberal, right? Because you were judging people by who they were. So but you're putting that asterisk. But maybe this is just an old view that really doesn't reflect who Donald Trump is. Except, let's listen to this footage from the 70s.
Okay. Oh, there is one other thing. Yeah? You know that colored guy that was here before?
Yeah?
You know him pretty good?
Yeah, he's a neighbor. Why?
Is he really coming back with those foot-long hot dogs?
Yeah, he'll be back with them, okay?
You know, I gave him $5.
Oh, no, don't worry about that. He's one of the good ones.
Oh, good. I'm dropping over the precinct for me.
Hey, I'll drop him off there myself. Thanks a million. Thanks for coming.
Well, that wasn't Donald Trump, but it was Archie Bunker, another Queens racist from the 1970s, talking in that same language.
Yes, but what a brilliant satire it was. Extraordinary,
Yes.
right? It was so great at the time.
So basically, I mean, sometimes when I think about who Donald Trump is, I mean, I think about Archie Bunker, a Queens racist from the 1970s. I mean, Archie Bunker had redeeming qualities as a character, but I mean, just that kind of era. I believe that his racism was kind of stamped in that, Queens 1970s era.
Yeah.
So, Harry, I've been saying over and over again.
Yes, John.
That people with malignant narcissism are untreatable. That's how I was trained. There is no therapy that can help them. They're not willing to go to therapy. They wouldn't know how to use therapy. They'd only try to exploit and manipulate the therapist. Certainly, there's no drug that's going to solve everything. But, as you know, I'm also working on a book about psilocybin therapy when I'm in my civilian life. And one of my colleagues, a very esteemed colleague, actually, Brian Richards, sent me this video because what we haven't considered is what would happen if Donald Trump had psilocybin therapy.
Expertman told me to go to Peru and do ayahuasca with his shaman. I thought it'd help with the election, give me that edge. But what happened next, I wasn't ready. I saw it all, greed, lies, my father's lack of love, my mother's coldness. Demons, dark entities, everything I'd buried came rushing out. It was brutal and life-changing. So I left politics to heal myself. I gave away most of my possessions and I went to India, meditated with the gurus, met all the mystics, studied all the metaphysical schools seeking the truth. I did every therapy, somatic experiencing, breathwork, and parts work. You wouldn't believe the things I tried. I purged everything I thought made me great. Slowly, the suffering started to fade. I started sharing what I'd learned. I created something bigger, holding space for others, an intentional community. And I led with love, guiding people to reconnect with their higher selves. They say I'm the greatest shaman now. Nobody does it better, and maybe they're right. It's a new kind of winning, one where I lead others to peace.
Well, we can only dream.
For those of you who only are listening to this on audio, try to get the video version. It's why AI can be wonderful. It's a beautiful, beautiful AI presentation. And yes, John, we can only dream.
Well, dealing with the real Donald Trump and his movement We have a very special guest today, director Dan Partland. I know a lot of you are familiar with the movie that we made, #Unfit, but the sequel, #Untruth, has been released last night. So it's very, very timely that we have him here to talk about the film. And there's the still, #Untruth, the psychology of Trumpism. And as you can see, it's pretty much streaming everywhere. So with no further ado, Dan, it's so good to see you. How are you?
Hello, John. Hello, Harry. Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
So are you excited about the film finally coming out?
I'm very excited. As you know, it was a long time in the making. And one of the challenges of making a film like this in a news cycle that is moving so fast is that you're trying, it forces you to take a step back. That's really what was the genesis of the first film, Unfit, was consuming endless amounts of news and feeling like getting very little for it, not understanding the situation. How do we take a step back and not be distracted by the crisis of the day? Is there something more important to be said? And that's what really led us down the road of looking at a lot of your work, both of your work, and the work on just the psychology of Trump himself was the consistent thing. The scandal was different every single day, but the psychology, there was an unmistakable sameness that no one was talking about in the news. And then similarly, for this film, the effort was really to not so much speak about Trump and his psychology, but what is obviously the bigger issue, which is what is going on in the culture. Why, there have always been guys like Trump. The question is, why was the ground soft now, fertile now, for someone like him to take root? And I think that's a bigger, more complicated question. We spent a long time tracking down a lot of different directions and trying to provide a lot of different insights. But the whole time you're sort of trying to, make a film that is going to be pertinent to the moment that you're releasing it into, which we knew would be in the run-up to the election, without knowing exactly what that, films are not like TV, where you make the show during the day, cable news, you make the show, prep the show during the day and you put it on at night. You're making it months and years in advance to present it into an environment where you're not really sure what's going to be going on. And that really forces you to take a bigger view, which is what we wanted to provide. People are getting fed plenty of news. I know I am, too much. But what are we getting for it? And so the effort with Untruth was to try to take a step back and provide a larger context maybe about what was going on.
A lot of people don't know this, but #Unfit, it was a big commercial success, actually. And I like to say it was long listed for the Oscars because it didn't get nominated. And it also wasn't on most of the short lists. But there were a few critics who put on theirs. I think it was at LA Weekly or the LA Times who listed it as tied for numbers 2. So it really was, people were hungry, right, to understand the psychology of Donald Trump. There was this incredible demand in the culture for that. And you met that with that film. But I think what motivated you then to do the sequel is now there's an equally strong demand to understand Trumpism, right? To understand this mass movement. That's the mass movement now that you're really trying to explain in the new film. Am I right?
Absolutely. First of all, Unfit was it was both a critical success and a commercial success. And I think you're right. It's because it was hitting a sweet spot where people were hungry for a little different kind of information. We can't just keep beating ourselves over the head with the crisis of the day. And in terms of making people, it made a lot of people's top lists. I think, there's something very important as a filmmaker when you're making a doc like this is that you're really, I think the films that rightfully get recognized on top 10 lists are for the artistry, for the craftsmanship. I think these films are very well crafted, but absolutely the content was so important. It was not, my effort was to make something ultimately that would communicate. Right. It was not to express my artistic whatever. And you really have to subvert some of your art. There are all kinds of things that I would have liked to do. And it's like that, we want to hit the sweet spot. We want to reach people. We don't want to distract them with style or form that is not sort of appropriate to it. And so the film's very, they're sort of down the middle stylistically. Yeah.
Well, why don't we see an example? A picture's worth 1,000 words. Let's see an example of artistry. Here's a clip from the film. Our generation has really lived through two pandemics. One, of course, is COVID-19, but the other is a psychiatric pandemic. I call it a pandemic of mass delusion. And I would argue that actually the second one is more dangerous. This pandemic has the potential to bring down our entire society. This is probably the most important psychological phenomena that's occurred in our century, in this lifetime, since World War II. And yet, if you look at the scientific literature, there's really not that much literature about it. That as a profession and as a society, we really have been unprepared for this moment.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's steps involved.
I had actually predicted that Trump would not leave office peacefully. Because he is a malignant narcissist, he is someone who would rather burn the country down than hand it over to the next man. The nature of malignant narcissism is they actually take a certain glee and pleasure in destroying things. If they can't dominate and control them, they want to destroy them. And the dark side of humanity can actually be called forth by the malignant narcissist. That the malignant narcissist kind of gives permission for people to release the most negative and destructive, most evil, most primitive aspects of themselves. Malignant normality is what happens when you have a malignantly narcissistic leader. The malignantly narcissistic leader has crazy, destructive ideas that would be seen as crazy by anybody.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
But once they're able to capture a society or a subset of society, they are then able to make those crazy beliefs become the new orthodoxy, the new conventional wisdom.
I'm telling you, if pins cave, we're gonna drag through the streets. You politicians are gonna get dragged through the streets.
If you lived in Soviet Russia, or Mao's China, or Hitler's Germany, or Rwanda, or Yugoslavia, then you know what it's like to have your neighbors become infected by an idea or an ideology that causes them to come to your house and want to kill you.
Hang Mike Pence! Hang Mike Pence!
They feel a sense of entitlement to dominate others. They feel entitled to that, and they feel entitled to use violence or any means necessary to make that happen. And I think that Trump, he activated them.
John, couldn't have said it better yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't need the middleman. I should just be interviewing myself. You guys, can you just get off the screen?
Listen, I love that sequence. It's a real premise idea for the film, and I think a really, really important observation, and sort of where it was the launching off point is how do we understand this moment, and why were we unprepared for it? And I'm very concerned, I would look at how we teach history. I mean, I think all of us, I think there's a background question in modern people's minds, American people's minds, growing up about these horrors that you've learned about in history, right? Whether it was the slave trade or Jim Crow or Nazi Germany, and how did it happen that so many people were on board with these things?
Yeah.
And we all like to sort of test our imagination about whether it's possible that we could be consumed in this, and of course we were assured that we would be on the side of right. But you at the same time that you can't get out of your own framework, and we don't know what atrocities we may be participating in right now that are invisible to us in the way that slavery or the Jim Crow South or whatever was to many people in those eras. We don't know. Maybe we would have been alive and we would have been the resistance, right? But I think that this is a test like that. I feel like it is a test like that, and we are seeing the culture cleave along these lines, and it's kind of unexpected about who is falling in what place. I think it is a moral test for society, and I don't think I really understand where it cleaves for people. What is the determining factor where some people are seeing it so vividly and some people just are really okay with what's going on? I don't think I fully understand that, and the film was a genuine exploration to try to come up with it. But one thing I will say, I do think we have taught the history wrong. I feel like the premise of post-World War II, maybe even post-1960s, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, was to really think about fascism as a defeated thing, as the past, as something that we, the collective people of the earth, had eradicated. We now, the earth went through that,
right,
and we understood it, and now it's done. When obviously, now we see, and this was even when we were doing Unfit, that a lot of people, scholars, all different people, were very, very reluctant to use the F word. I was lectured up and down to not use the F word casually. This is not fascism. We're not comfortable using that word now. Nobody feels that anymore. Everybody is very comfortable recognizing the similarities right now. But yeah, we thought that we had eradicated it when obviously it's cyclical. Obviously, it's something in the human mind.
Yes.
Why I'm here on this show. There's something psychological that is triggered. And the way you spoke about it in that clip, John, about it being activated, is this theory which then jives nicely with the way political scientists would talk about it, which is and I'll finish. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, please go right ahead. I'm fascinated.
Which is just that authoritarianism is a latent trait in all of us, and that it can be brought forward. It can be activated by the right circumstances on the ground.
And it seems to be, when you're looking across Europe, whenever there is a perceived influx of the other as immigrants or refugees, you're seeing the right rising in France, in Italy. No, Dan, that's fascinating, because I think John and I are about 10 years older than you are. So I was raised to think of fascism as a thing of the past. It was settled. It was done. It started to break for me during the Clinton years, when there was the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, and you started seeing concentration camps and people being murdered because of their religion. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, why are we letting this happen?
Right.
But I think during Trump, and here's the question I'm going to ask you, because I agree with you that the way history is taught is misleading, which is when Trump's policy of taking infants away from their parents on the border, and it went on for months. And I think people don't remember, but there was a sense of being really kind of tormented by it, because we couldn't stop it. It wasn't like trying to keep Jewish babies being rounded up in a European city, and yet there it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no. Obviously, there's a slow and insidious creep that normalizes these horrific things, and and it's complicated because, of course, the fact that they in both examples you gave, that these were not Western, from European descent, Western culture, right? There was something, whether Americans are not that informed about what goes on in Eastern Europe or, other places like that. But it was like, I think there is a feeling of, a normal, healthy human instinct that is more protective of people the more like yourself they are, right? And that's just, we have to accept that we're hardwired for that, and that we sort of have to overcome that, that people who look and sound alike, we're going to be more defensive of. So people coming over from Mexico, they were different enough, plus there was the concept that they were lawbreakers, right? So that was part of the permission structure for doing this horrific thing. And I guess if you were angry enough and activated enough, if you were frustrated enough at in perceived injustice, maybe it was affecting you, maybe it was just the knowledge of it. then I guess you could normalize that, and you could believe that that was an okay thing. I mean, I don't know. I think we should also, of course, give appropriate weight to the insularity, to the silos in the culture. Because of course, when everybody in your group is normalizing this and saying this is okay,
I want to get to that because that's our next clip. So I have two more clips that I wanted to show. Basically, there's two. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically, there's two. And what I'll call them either competing theories or complementary theories about what underlies Trumpism. One is a more information-based theory, right? That we've all talked about, how, the Ash experiment, right? If you have three lines and one is obviously shorter, but you have Confederates in the room who are saying the longer line is shorter, a third of the people will say that the shorter line is longer because we're so influenced by the opinions around us. But take that and multiply it by the internet, right? Well, we're seeing the same thing over and over again, thousands of times, and Fox and whatever, that it becomes truth. That's how something absurd can suddenly be normalized. So, and the other theory is more about the psychology of the Trump supporter, right? And whether they're an authoritarian personality. So I just want to let the listeners know those are sort of the two basic ideas. And then let's look at both of those clips. So let's look at the first one.
We did a study called Malgorithm, where we looked at the Instagram algorithm and we fed in a bunch of fake accounts which were following wellness influencers. What we found was that the algorithm kept recommending anti-vax accounts. Once you follow the anti-vax accounts, it started giving you QAnon and anti-Semitic accounts. And vice versa, if you were following anti-Semitic accounts, it gave you COVID disinformation and vaccine disinformation. The reason for that is because the algorithm had recognized in human psychology a tendency that if you are feeling uncertainty, if you're looking to alternative answers for the problems that you face, you are very likely to be vulnerable to conspiracism. And the algorithms have recognized this and now model it. They literally take us down. They say to us, why don't you take the next step on your conspiracist radicalization? This is happening simultaneously all over the world. And that single change in how we order the information in our world, how we decide what wins and what loses, has fundamentally changed the corpus of knowledge that comprises our society.
Yeah, big ups to Imran Ahmed of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Yeah, he really lays it out kind of brilliantly, and I think fuses those two ideas. It's both the psychology and the information being fed into it. And now that we have machine learning, we've built machines that are very effective at manipulating us.
Artificial intelligence is radicalizing us.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Is there a second clip, or should we comment?
Yeah. So okay. Well, I have to a trigger warning. I'm also in this next clip, so just I'm
triggered already.
This is the psychology of the Trump.
Surprise, surprise.
Theodore Adorno came up with the idea of the authoritarian personality. He was, for obvious reasons, intrigued with the question of who becomes a Nazi. How did this happen? How did people go crazy? And is there a certain type of person who resonates to this authoritarian ideology and who can be activated? The authoritarian personality sees the world in black and white, us and them.
They have nothing but disdain for you and for your values. They lecture you on open borders.
They externalize all blame. They take no responsibility for any of the negative outcomes in their life and instead feel victimized.
No politician in history has been treated worse or more unfairly.
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
You're creating violence by your questions.
Theodore Adorno, he even came up with a scale for it.
The F for fascism scale. It's predictive of attitudes that would be considered authoritarian. They did a lot of different versions of it. Now I will do interviews with people. Within 4-day questions, I can sort people on an authoritarian scale from non-authoritarian to very authoritarian and have a high probability that the person who's very authoritarian is going to love obedience, love order, love uniformity, and be scared of difference.
In some ways, the authoritarian personalities were very submissive, that they were looking for a powerful leader to submit themselves to. And so this celebration of how powerful Trump is, this kind of crazy idealization of him, the golden calf Trump that was at CPAC and these crazy memes, people are getting a vicarious sense of being powerful themselves by identifying with him and their connection with him. So by being connected to a person is so powerful, it makes them feel empowered. And that 35% that are more oriented towards having an authoritarian personality, they have formed a bond with him that is really kind of unbreakable.
Wow, that's great.
Very well said, John. Very well said. Well, but I think that to me that sort of brings us to the central question, which where we started, which is, of course, there have always been guys like Trump. The question is, why was the ground fertile for this to take root at this point? And obviously is that because, as we've said, it's happening all over the world at this moment. And, there's various different theories, right? Pace of change, things that are destabilizing. We looked at the social media piece, the internet piece. We didn't look at the immigration piece, although certainly fear of the other and the outsider is a fixture of authoritarian movements. It's always been a unifying principle to divide people. And, certainly, I'm not an expert on evolutionary psychology, but human beings, they do move in groups. I hate when people say, oh, humans are tribal, but there's truth to that.
Dan, I really like what you're saying. It's so helpful. The other piece that I talk about with my students is the fact that after World War II, when we were rebuilding Europe and Japan, we were awash in money.
Right.
We were building cars for the entire world. The UAW was so powerful that you could be in the 60s an auto worker and your wife wouldn't have to work, and you could have 2 cars, a house, and a cabin in northern Michigan, right? And what happened by the 70s is that wasn't enough money anymore.
Right.
And by the 80s, every household, every working class household, both people had to work. And then you could make it work. And by the 90s, that's not enough. The working class is a catastrophe right now because of the cost of things, the cost of housing. And I think that's another piece that when you have a strong man who comes in and says, I'm going to fight for you, and these guys are assholes, and the government isn't working very well, and it's all broken, and I'm going to fix it.
Right.
That also is another piece that pulls them in, I think.
Very satisfying to have a guy who what he says sounds right to you. Somebody's finally saying that thing that I've always felt, right? Which a lot of times means they're unexamined knee-jerk reactions that we all do feel, anger at the difference, anger at the change. And he's going to take it on, and that is the source of my anxiety right now. And he's going to crush it. And that's really what I want. And so I don't want him constrained. I want an authoritarian. I don't want a whole process where people are going to vote and talk about it. That's going to slow down the relief to my anxiety.
Dan, you asked about an evolutionary theory. I actually do have an evolutionary theory. I think the triggering event is that in 15 years, whites are not going to be the majority anymore in America. I think that is really the triggering event. You talk about tribalism, going back to the chimpanzees, right? There used to be the chimpanzees that Jane Goodall viewed. They were all so human and nice and loving. And, they had competition between the males for dominance. They called them displays, but no one got hurt. They were just big sort of displays of puffery and aggression. But then once the troop got so big, it split into 2 troops. One of the alpha males leads the other males to the other territory, and they kill all the other males. Even if these people had been their friends and their family members before, once the troops have split, now these chimpanzees go to war. And so either you follow the strong chimp and conquer your neighbor, or you will be conquered and your DNA will not go on. And so I think that tribalism, that's the core. It's actually pre-human, I believe. The core that responds to this type of leader, I believe, is actually pre-human. That's how primitive it is. But because people, and of course, let's face it, the whites have been pretty, aggressive about being dominant over everybody these last few centuries, right? But this is where their dominance is going to slip away. They're literally going to lose it. And that's why they had to destroy democracy, because in a few years, democracy was going to not destroy them, but take away their dominance.
So if I can just summarize, John is pushing an evolutionary argument. I'm talking about politics and economics, and Dan is the psychologist. He's what he's talking about why people are drawn to them.
No, it's good for us to pass the hats around, try some different things on. Yeah, listen. I think it's. I mean, some of this conversation is at 50,000 feet, and that's where it should be. But on total, I think it's all really important, because I think that we're spending too much time being angry at each other and not enough time trying to understand each other.
Yes.
And I don't think, I think sometimes when people say that, they mean something a little different than I do. They mean, both sides, they mean some kind of a false equivalency. They mean both sides have good points here, right? And I don't think that's the case. I think that really fails the moral test that we spoke about. But I don't think that just because there's not a moral equivalency in these different ideas in the culture doesn't mean that we don't have the obligation to try to understand it. And understand it and have some compassion, because of course 60 million people voted for Donald Trump, right? So of course it's cultural, it's sociological, it's psychological. Of course it's all of those things. It's not, and when there's one bad apple, all right, that guy, that there's some deviancy there. We don't have a huge obligation. It would be nice to understand it, but we need to protect from that. But when it's everywhere, when it's in every single family, how do we, we need some wisdom to try to knit this thing back together and to try to bring people over from what I think of as the dark side. I really think it is the side that is acting out in anger and frustration, and not acting out of noble and virtuous motivations about creating a better world and making it more fair and equitable for everybody, and bringing people together. I think that there is in this moment there is great joy, and I think it's ebbing. I do feel like the fever is starting to break, but there's been glee from corners that I think were having the most frustration and feeling unheard the most, that finally they were empowered to release all of that frustration in whatever kind of angry and I think unhelpful way, but to just release it. And so now we're going to need to show a lot of compassion, because it will be defeated. It will be defeated. I'm certain it'll be defeated. Whether it will be defeated in this election cycle or not, I don't know. I think it's going to be a very tough election, but it will ultimately be defeated, and ultimately the people who were carrying the flag are going to have to be forgiven on some level, and brought back into the fold. Because there's a better way.
They have to be denazified. Dan, I'm so glad that you made this film, and tell people where they can see it.
Really, I can see it on all on-demand platforms right now. I know that it's not live today on Amazon. Amazon is always a little bit slower than the other platforms to get it posted. but pretty much anywhere where you can see a video on demand, it's available. And we did that deliberately. It's not on a subscription service, because when you have a subscription service, you only have those subscribers. Really, we have 100% coverage in the United States.
Cool.
Anybody who watch TV can watch this movie.
Well, and I hope it's long listed for the Oscars.
Yes. That's what
Harry,
we
do you have any other questions? Harry, do you have any other questions?
No, but what a great discussion, Dan, and thanks so
Yeah.
much for doing this film.
Thanks
I
for
can't
coming,
wait to
and
see
thanks
it.
for making it.
Thank you both. Great to have
Take
you, and
care.
John, honored to have your participation in the film. You're so instrumental in the film and in my thinking about all this stuff in general. You're really just such a font of knowledge for all this stuff.
He is.
Good. I'm
Thanks,
glad.
Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Be well.
Wow.
So it's exciting,
What
the
an
film's coming out.
What an interesting discussion. And John, you're just terrific in it. And it's so great to see it. I can't wait to see the whole thing.
Well, Harry, so we're at the shrink wrap section of the show. What did we learn this week?
Well, like last week, I actually have a clip for us to look at, a short one that I think will pull things together. This is at the end of the interview that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz did on CNN with Dana Bash. And many of you have seen the clip where Dana Bash quotes Trump saying that she's just discovered she's black or pretended she wasn't. And, you know, Kamala's response is the same old stuff. Next question. But Dana tries at the end by showing this picture of Kamala's great niece watching her speak at the convention. And even if you're listening to this instead of seeing it, I think you'll hear what I'm getting at in the way that Kamala answers this question.
And last question, Madam Vice President, the photograph that has gone viral. You were speaking, one of your grandnieces that you were just talking about was watching you accept the nomination. You didn't explicitly talk about gender or race in your speech, but it obviously means a lot to a lot of people, and that viral picture really says it. What does it mean to you?
You know, I am running because I believe that I am the best person to do this job at this moment, for all Americans, regardless of race and gender. But I did see that photograph, and I was deeply touched by it. And you're right, it's the back of her head, her two little braids, and then I'm in the front of the photograph, obviously speaking. And it's very humbling. It's very humbling in many ways.
Did she talk to you about it afterwards?
Oh, she had a lot to talk about. She had a lot. She listened to everything, and she listens to everything.
She gave you your hot takes?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It makes me cry a little bit every time I see it. I hope you noted. I think when Dana springs that picture on her, Kamala Harris's smile gets deeper, right? It's so spontaneous. And then Dana asked that question about race, and Kamala Harris stuck to her script, which is, I'm not going to talk about being a woman or a woman of color. I'm going to talk about being the best person for this job. But then Dana is so smart and asks her, did she talk to you about it? And that's when Kamala's smile comes back, and it's so full. And that's when she says, oh, she had a lot to say. And I think the humanness of that moment, the deep love she has for that grandniece, her pleasure in thinking about her, even while she's on an interview, her first interview where millions of people are going to see her for the first time. There's that spontaneity. And I believe that that is psychological health. I think that's in stark contrast for the way that Trump can assemble his charisma and can relate to the audience by pulling them in, the way that we just heard Dan talk about and John so thoughtfully in that movie. It is connecting with an audience, but it's not what Kamala Harris was just doing. It was her thinking of her grandniece with love, with pleasure, being charmed by her. Imagine a little girl having lots of thoughts and questions. all of which inspired Kamala at that moment. And I felt that it inspired me. And that's what I want you, and that's what I want you all to pay attention to, is look at the way that she creates psychological community and experience with her audience in direct contrast to the malignant normality that John was talking about the Trump movement.
You know, as psychologists, we're qualified to talk about psychopathology, and the premises of this show is that we have been analyzing how sick Donald Trump is, and let me count the ways, right? And just how deep it goes, and we analyze it and we shred it, and sometimes we ridicule it, but as psychologists, we're also qualified to talk about psychological health. And I think you're starting a new website, a new channel about happiness. You know, normally we think of psychologists dealing with misery, but you're talking about dealing with happiness. So I think it's appropriate that you're ending with this clip of saying, look, this is what happiness looks like. This is what health looks like. This is what healthy relationships look like. And it's important for us to say the contrast couldn't be starker. Donald Trump is the sickest human being we have ever encountered in our entire clinical careers all put together. But this is the opposite. This is someone who is genuinely healthy.
And I would argue that when looking at his relationships, that Biden was very healthy in his deep love for his children, for his wife, for his empathy for others. But he didn't have the strength to be a counter wave.
Right.
In the way that Kamala Harris is. And it's the most extraordinary thing that she's come into her own at just the right moment. And John was nice enough to mention my happiness channel. I'm only going to plug it one more time, which is I started a happiness channel because I'm teaching a course at Cornell called Pursuing Happiness with over 500 students, and they're wonderful students. So Rex, if you just put that slide up, there it is. You can search for it on YouTube, Harry Segal, the Happiness Channel. 2,000 of you already signed up. I'm so pleased. So I hope to see you there.
Harry, you can plug your Happiness Channel as much as you want. Because you know what? Because you know what? With Kamala rising and Trump shrinking, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good.
How good are you
I'm feeling good.
John?
I'm feeling happy. I'm feeling so
John,
happy.
You're not feeling that happy,
Rex,
are you?
hit it, Rex.
You're not feeling that happy, are you?
I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy.
Rex, can you turn that off?
I'm a never Trump.
John, listen.
What?
It was funny.
What?
It's fine, but
what?
We're clinical psychologists. We've been practicing for combined 70 years. We have to have some dignity. I mean, this kind of bouncing around, it embarrasses me. And I just remember that one of the problems with Trump is that he has no shame, and we have to have some shame. So can we just kind of cut this out? Listen, folks, we're going to start fresh next week. Our shows drop on Friday. It's Shrinking Trump.
Oh, wait a minute, Harry. I've thought about it.
Yeah?
And I don't feel ashamed. I don't feel ashamed. I feel happy. Hit it, Rex.
I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy.
There you go, Harry.
I'm a never Trump guy.
Get him join me next week, folks. Dr. Happiness, folks.
I'm a never Trump guy. I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.